UI elements are commonly used to provide user control of game settings. Often the settings appear when the game is paused. So in this lesson we will create a pause screen that will later be used for game settings. I am looking at my Scene 01. In the hierarchy you can see that I have added a load panel to this scene as well. This activity is described in the activity challenges for this unit. Let's add a second canvas named Game Settings, and add a panel to that canvas named Settings Panel. We will use the Settings panel to display the game settings and let the player adjust them while the game is paused. I placed the Settings panel in a new canvas instead of using the previous canvas because we will maintain this canvas throughout all of our scenes. Let's deactivate the original canvas so our view of game settings is unobstructed. Let's focus on the Settings panel and change the orientation of our view. Open up the Color property, change the alpha so the panel is opaque. Choose whatever color you want. I'll use the same low value for the red, blue, and green to get a darker shade of gray. Add a text component to the Settings panel. Change the text to Settings. Change the color of the text to white, and move the text component to the top left of the panel. We will list each setting category under the settings text, and when a category is selected, we will show the settings for that category on the right. If you run the game, the settings panel is immediately visible. Stop the game. Select the game settings object and add a script also named Game Settings. Move the new script into the scripts folder and then open it in an editor. And delete the comments. We are going to use this script to store settings for the game that will be accessible in any of our scenes. There are other ways to do this in Unity, including using player prefs, but this is one way, and it is also just useful to know how to create game objects that are persistent across scenes. I did not add the behavior suffix to this script name because the primary purpose of the script will be to store properties. Let's first add a public property of type GameObject named Settings Panel, which will store a reference to the Settings Panel GameObject. In the Start method, we can use this property with the setActive method to disable the Settings panel. Let's save this. In Unity, select the Game Settings object and move the Settings panel to set the value of the Settings panel property. Now when we play the game, the Settings panel is not immediately visible. We want the Settings panel to appear when we press a key. Back in the code, let's add a public property of type keycode named PauseKey. In the Update method, we can now say if input.getKeyDown PauseKey. Then we use settingspanel.setActive to set the value to the opposite of settingspanel.activeSelf. This code is very similar to the code we wrote previously in the ToggleObjectOnKeyPress script, used for toggling a flashlight on and off. Now we are just toggling on and off the settings panel every time the pause key is pressed. Save and return to Unity. With game settings selected, let's look in the inspector and use the drop-down to set the value of pause key to escape. And now we can press escape to toggle the settings panel on and off. However, if you walk forward while paused, you can hear your footsteps. Clearly, we still need to pause the game when the settings panel is showing. In the if statement that detects when the pause key is pressed, after the command to activate the settings panel, add another conditional statement. If settings panel.activeSelf, then we say time.timescale equals 0, and otherwise time.timescale equals 1. The timescale represents the scale in which time is passing. This can be used for slow motion effects. When timescale is at 1, the time is passing as fast as real time. When timescale is at 0.5, the time is passing at half the speed of real time. And when timescale is at 0, the game is basically paused. When we run the game now and press escape to pause the game, I can no longer run forward. I press escape again to unpause, and I am able to run forward again. Let's create a public method with no return value named pause, and another public method with no return value named unpause. Move the command that pauses the game into the pause method, and move the command that unpauses the game into the unpause method. In the conditional statement, call the pause method when the settings panel is activated, and call the unpause method when the settings panel is deactivated. Now that we will likely not be adding any other code in the if or else block, let's remove the curly braces. Why did we create these additional methods? There are several answers to this. First, code is more readable when it is broken into meaningful chunks. There are many more things that we may want to happen when we pause, and the code for this can all stay together in the pause and unpause methods. For example, we might want to add code to pause the audio sources of the background music and ambient sound. We may also want to lock the camera so that the rotation of the camera is not changing while the game is paused. Basically, we may need to manually pause elements and functionality of the game that are not paused by setting the timescale to 0. We may also want additional actions to occur, such as playing a sound effect at the moment the game is paused or unpaused. Another reason for moving this code into methods is so the methods may be called from other places in the script, or even from other scripts. There may be times when you need to pause or unpause the game, even though the player did not press the key to do so. For instance, you may want the game to pause while a new scene is loading. Defining the methods to be public allows other objects, other than the object the script is attached to call the methods. Let's go ahead and turn off the audio files when the setting panel appears. Recall that we created the Nature Sound game object and added an audio source component to that game object for the ambient sound. Also recall that we created the Rabbit game object and added an audio source component to that game object to play some dance music when the player is near enough to the rabbit. Let's create one private property of type audio source named Nature Sound and another private property of type audio source named Dance Music. In the start method, set the value of Nature Sound to GameObject.find NatureSound.getComponent of type audio source, and set the value of Dance Music to GameObject.find Rabbit.getComponent of type audio source. Now in the pause method, we can say NatureSound.pause and DanceMusic.pause. Similarly, in the unpause method, we say NatureSound.play and DanceMusic.play. Let's save and play the game. When the game is unpaused, I can hear the music and the nature sounds. When I press Escape to pause the game, the audio clips pause as well. If all is working well, remember to reactivate the original canvas that contains the load panel and water lens game objects.